Hello and welcome to Board Game Gumbo. Today we have a preview for you of a game coming to Kickstarter in late March. This is Vigilante by Paranoia Rising Games and first-time designer Reed Mascola. Vigilante is a game for 3 to 5 players that plays in 45 to 90 minutes. Players will take on the role of the leader of a team of superheroes intent on returning escaped supervillains to jail. But keep your eyes on the other players because not everyone is one of the good guys. Vigilante combines action selection and a hidden role mechanism with just a little bit of randomness and mischief for a game that plays a bit like a lightweight Battlestar Galactica. So here we have the main board for Vigilante set up. Aside from the main board, each player will also get a player mat, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. Please do keep in mind that this is a pre-production copy of the game, so components and even rules may change between now and when the game launches, and they may even change again during the Kickstarter itself. Each game of Vigilante begins by determining what scenario you want to play. There are several cards for the different scenarios and also for the different player counts. But say we want to play a 5-player game of shifting allegiances, which is the sort of the more advanced way to play the game. Your scenario card is going to tell you a couple different things. One's going to tell you how many cards each player is going to start with in their hand. It's going to tell you how many rounds you're going to play through and how many events are going to start out on the event track over here. It's also going to tell you how to set up the villain deck, how many of each level card, and finally, what identities to include in this particular scenario. In this one, you're going to have one good identity and then a mix of 4 additional identities, which can be one of the 3 types available in the game. There are 3 types of identities. There are the good identities, there's evil identities, and then there are neutral identities. The good and the evil identities are pretty straightforward. All identities are trying to capture villains. They all kind of share that same objective, which is nice because you can't pick out who the good or the bad guys are based off of just defeating villains. However, I think the standouts for the identities are the neutral ones. The neutral identities, to me, are the most interesting aspect of this sort of hidden role mechanism in the game, which kind of reminds me of Dead of Winter. So personally for me, when the Kickstarter launches, I'd really like to see some of the kind of the more interesting aspects of the neutral identities maybe apply to some good or evil identities. So for instance, here we have the Profiteer, and he wants to jail villains like all identities want, but he also wants to have the most influence among alive heroes at the end of the game. If he completes that objective by the end of the rounds, however many rounds you're playing, he will win the game along with whoever else has completed their objectives. There's quite a few neutral identities in the game, and they all have these really interesting mechanisms to them. Once you have your identity, you'll then look here at the bottom, and it'll tell you which of the identity tokens you're going to keep. So you'll be given 2 of each identity token, and then you'll keep the tokens based off of what it says here. So for a neutral identity, such as this one, I'd keep 2 neutral tokens, 1 good and 1 evil, and I put those on my player mat face down, like so. Once you set your allegiance tokens, you can't move them. They'll stay there for the rest of the game. There are mechanisms that allow other players to look at your allegiance tokens and ultimately discover what identity you have. Once you have your identity, you'll take a player mat and a screen, which will determine your player color, in this case blue, and the components in that color. You'll set out your allegiance tokens based on your identity, and then you'll be dealt 2 starting heroes. You'll select one of those heroes to begin the game with, and they will go to your number 1 spot on your player mat. Anytime you gain a hero, it goes to the lowest numbered spot on your board, so your starting hero will always begin in your 1 slot. Your little tokens here are your actions per round, so you have 4, and then you have 2 dice, which are used for your events. Each game of Vigilante will play for the number of rounds determined by the scenario, after which players will reveal their identities and a winner or winners will be revealed. Players have 4 actions that they can take on their turn, which you keep track of with these little energy tokens. You're going to take 1 action at a time, removing a token each time until you've taken all 4 of your actions and the round is over. Your player screen actually gives you a really good map of what you're able to do on your turn. So first, there is a number of free actions that you can take, and these are mostly determined by the cards that you will draw during the course of the game. You'll always start with a certain number of city cards in your hand, and these are both actions that you can take on your turn, as well as cards that you can use to recruit heroes to your team. So some cards have this symbol on it, which means they are a one-time use. You play them for the effect of the card. Equipment cards can be added to your heroes, simply slotted behind them to give them bonuses to their health or damage, and possibly some special ability. And then there's also ambush cards, which can be played on other players' turns after a triggered effect. Any number of these cards can be played on your turn as free actions before your main action. Then you go into your actual player turn, where you choose one of these main actions to do. First, you can draw a card, like those from the city deck that you just saw. You can also heal damage from your hero, attack a villain, recruit a new hero, pick up equipment from your heroes, trade cards, or use any other ability that may be on one of your heroes or equipment cards. Healing and trading are pretty self-explanatory actions. Recovering equipment lets you save items from your heroes if they're about to be defeated from taking too much damage, so that you can play them on later turns. You can use an action to draw a card. At the start of the game, you're only going to be able to draw from the city deck, but once you've defeated at least 3 villains, you can begin drawing from the agency deck. There's actually a really interesting choice here between the two decks, because the agency deck has more powerful cards overall, but the value on those cards is lower, so they're less useful in recruiting heroes. Recruiting heroes and attacking villains are kind of the two main actions of the game, so we'll talk about those in a little more depth. On the main game board, you'll see a row for the hero market, and that's where you can go to recruit new heroes to your superhero team. Each hero has a cost in the top right, which you have to discard from your hand in city or agency cards of that value or higher. You'll then be able to add the hero to your lineup in the lowest numbered spot available, and then they contribute their damage whenever attacking villains. Each hero also has a health total, the amount of damage they can take, and then typically they'll have some special ability. This one is an action. It requires one of your primary action tokens, but allows you to draw 2 cards from the agency deck once per round. Once you have some heroes on your team, maybe you've equipped them, you're going to want to go out and you want to defeat some villains. This is really the main mechanic of the game, because as I said, all identities are looking to defeat a certain number of villains. So say that's the action you take on your turn. First thing you're going to do is you're going to draw the top card of the villain deck, which is right now a level 1 card. You'll flip it over, and you'll see this grid up here in the top left. That's the damage that this villain is going to do to your superhero lineup. And it is determined by this grid here. So your number 1 hero, which would be in this spot on your board, will take 2 damage, and your number 2 hero will take 1 damage. If you didn't have anybody in the number 2 hero spot, that damage would simply not be done. After the villain has done damage and potentially defeated one of your heroes, you're then going to check the attack value of your remaining heroes, and if it meets or exceeds this number, you've defeated the villain and get to move this card to your jail. Many villains have an effect that goes off once you've jailed them. This one, for instance, allows you to heal 1 damage from one of your heroes. But for the rest of this game, this card is essentially just in your jail and counts towards your victory condition. As you progress further in the game, the villains will get more difficult, and now we're dealing with level 2 villains if we decide to go fight a villain. These have more health, which is actually tracked on your player screen, which is really nice. It gives you the range of health, at least for the different villains, although their attacks, as you can see, can get pretty serious. This one's going to deal 3 damage to any of your heroes that are undamaged when you're fighting this one. But again, if after taking damage, your remaining heroes have enough strength, they will defeat the villain and he'll go to your jail. And then eventually you'll get to level 3 villains, which have some really interesting mechanics to them. This one, for instance, is only going to deal damage to your 3 and 4 hero, but he's going to deal damage equal to the number of cards in your hand. since there's no hand limit, that could get really dangerous. You also have cards such as this one. Whenever you reveal him, he deals no damage. He simply doubles all the damage that are already on your heroes. And finally, we have Night Strike. It's going to do 3 damage to your front line and 1 damage to your back line heroes. But whenever you're attacking back at him, you do not get the bonuses of your equipment cards. There's one final mechanic in Vigilante we haven't talked about yet, and it's actually one of my favorites, and that's this event track over here. Depending on what scenario you play, you may start with events already on the board, but regardless, whenever you start a round, the first player for that round is going to draw 2 events randomly from a bag, and we'll keep those events hidden. But they will look at them, they will pick one, and they will place it into the event track, like so. Some of these events do good things and some of them do bad things. And this is one of the most interesting aspects of the game, I think, because it adds that little bit of uncertainty of why somebody is putting up a certain event on the event track. Once events are on the track, then after a player takes their 4th or final action of a round, they are going to roll their dice. So if we were playing the blue player, after we take our 4th action, we're going to roll our dice. And that's also going to be behind our screen, but I'll just do it in front here for now. And then we're going to determine which one of these 2 dice we're going to put up for the events. Now, both of these don't apply to any of these events, so that's fine. But say I had a 5 and a 1, and I put up the 5. That's a little suspicious because that's going to activate this event here. But again, that's one of the interesting aspects of the game. Then the next player in player order is going to take their turn, which would be their 4th action. And they're also going to roll their dice and put one up in the event area. After all players have done that, you're going to activate any event that has a die that meets its value. So even if all the dice up here are 5s, you're only going to activate this event once, but you can activate multiple bad events this way. So now you know everything you need to in order to play a game of Vigilante. If the game looks interesting to you, there's a link to the Kickstarter preview page in the video description, along with the link to the games page on BoardGameGeek. And if you need a little more convincing to see if the game is right for you, you can find the game on Tabletop Simulator. I know it's not easy getting board games to the table right now, but playing them virtually is a great option as well. Vigilante is planned to launch on Kickstarter March 30th, so don't miss out.